if this thing works. So, who am I? Space Rogue. I was a member of Loft Heavy Industries, which was right here in Boston, so it's good to be back in town. Created the Whack Mac Archives, one of the, or probably the only, or the first collection of Macintosh hacking utilities on the internet. Testified to Congress, weak computer security and government. And actually, that's Stefan there on the side there. He's here in the audience somewhere. Edited the editor-in-chief of the Hacker News Network, both 10 years ago when it was a website and more recently when it was a video podcast. Currently, I work as the Threat Intelligence Manager at Trustwave Spider Labs, which is why I now use the name C. Thomas. Can't really work for Trustwave and go as Space Rogue, unfortunately. So now I use both. I've also been to DEF CON, Source, and Hope, spoke at all of those, and I've been on MTV, ABC News, CNN, etc., etc., etc. So I've been looking at and in the media for a while, and this is sort of what brought this talk together. I read a lot of news stories, watch a lot of news stories, and I see a lot of patterns develop, and I don't really like those patterns. So today we're going to talk about what media hype is. We're going to go over some different examples, some of which you've probably heard of, some of which you hopefully haven't. We'll try to figure out how to identify the hype, and then how to be a part of the reality. All right. So, before we get started, we have to define media hype. Communication that reach or influence people widely. And then if you look at the hype definition, to intensify by ingenious or questionable claims or methods. That fits this talk perfectly, because that even the second definition, create interest by flamboyant or dramatic methods. So we're going to be looking at the hype as it applies to media. So I'm going to give several examples throughout the talk. The examples are not presented in any sort of order. They're kind of chronological, but not exactly. The older the story is, the harder it has been to research. Because the web is a today medium, and historical stuff on the web is just, it goes away and you can't find it. Hype happens every single day. These are just the examples that are really the biggest and egregious examples that I could find, and the examples that I could actually find the reality to go with them. A lot of times you find the hype, but you can't find the reality because it never comes out. Or it disappears because... I will apologize to Steve in advance, and anybody else in the audience who is a journalist or a reporter. I'm going to rag on your industry quite a lot. And I know some of you are good, a lot of you unfortunately. I'm not covering hype on theoretical attacks. You've all heard hype on printers catching fire, jackpotting ATMs, attacking cars as they drive down the street through their wireless networks. That's a whole different kind of hype, and I'm not going to cover that today. So we're going to get into the first story, the first hype news item. It's Kevin Mitnick. Is he here? No. I can talk about him. The story is that he supposedly broke into NORAD and could launch nuclear missiles. New York Times was picked up by Reuters, which was published in St. Petersburg Times. It was on CNN. As we go through some of these examples, one of the things I want you to make note of is the dates of some of these articles on the hype side, because then when we reality side, some things aren't going to make sense. Specifically, in this case, the CNN example, March 18th, 1999. Mitnick first received national attention in 1982 when he hacked into the North American Defense Command, a feat that inspired the 1983 film War Games. That's totally all false. But CNN states it as a fact, right? That he did it and that he was inspiration for War Games, and he said that in 1999. Yeah, that's all I want on that one. The reality is that it never really happened. All right, Katie Hafner, in that first quote there from Chicago Tribune, is actually the Newsweek senior editor, and she's the co-author of Cyberpunk with Markov. I'm not a big fan of that book, but she was quoted as saying that she could find no evidence that the NORAD story was anything but a myth. Notice that's in 1996. All right. Kevin Mitnick himself, in his book Ghost in the Wires, he claims that this whole thing happened after War Games came out, and he attributes it to a quote by the prosecutor when he was on trial, and the prosecutor who claimed that Mitnick could start a nuclear holocaust. He can whistle into a telephone and launch a nuclear missile from NORAD. This was said in open court. Yes. If you ever read his book, he's got a great story about how he tricked the guard using the phone and getting a lot. It's actually a pretty cool story. But anyway, yeah, see, now you already threw me off my track. Thanks, man. But the point here is that the Chicago Tribune published their denial of this story in 1996, right? CNN, in 1999, is still calling it a fact. 3 years later. So obviously, nobody at CNN did any fact-checking or researching to try to disprove or verify the original fact. Once it got published, it was considered, okay, somebody else checked it, now I can just reuse it as a fact. Satellite health. This is one of my favoriter ones. Favoriter. That's a good word. I like that word. Spaceronics lives. This story was first reported in a newspaper called the Sunday Business, which is now out of business. I think it was bought by Financial Times at some point. It was in the UK. And so on Sunday, they published a story of a satellite that got held by ransom by hackers, and it was picked up by Reuters and ran on Monday. Hackers seized Britain's military satellite. Britain's military satellite held by hackers. Crackers reportedly take Britain Mill satellite. Made a lot of news that Monday. And this is the actual article, the whole thing. This is the whole article. Now, you may not be able to read it, but I'll pick out some choice quotes for you. Quoting security sources, they altered the course of one of the Britain satellites. The sources said one intelligence source, one security source said. This is a prime example of what you see in a hyped article. There's nowhere here that anybody else can go back and verify this story at all. There's nobody you can call. There's no way you can tell what happened. It's all these anonymous sources. And there's an outrageous claim that they altered the course of the satellite. And this was in 1999, a long time ago. The reality was, of course, that it never happened. H&N actually, at the time, this was one of the big stories that I was able to break at the time because I totally called this story totally crap from the beginning, Monday morning. MSNBC picked up on it, and eventually Reuters actually posted a retraction like 4 days later. I can't find the retraction online anywhere now. I can find the original story. It still exists. The retraction doesn't exist anymore. Except for this one link, which is actually an archive of a mailing list that you really have to Google to hard to find if you know what you're looking for. All right. Where am I? But the hype continues to live years and years later. PC Magazine, December 26, 2008. Gentleman by the name of Corinne Iozzo, who wrote a top 10 mysterious cybercrimes article. And the number 2 most mysterious cybercrime was this group of hackers who took control of this British satellite. He never bothered to do any fact-checking. He didn't do any Google searches. Obviously, he just found this story online somewhere and added it as number 2 to his list. Corinne I can't pronounce his name or her name, Iozzo. I looked him up. He's a freelancer. This is the only InfoSec article that he or she has ever written. He's a very prolific writer. He has a lot of articles. She has a lot of articles around, but they're all about like the cheapest MP3 player. It's the only thing he writes about. You know, the best printer deals. And then out of the blue, he writes this top 10 most mysterious cybercrime article, and PC Mag picks it up. I sent the editor a nasty gram, but they never really changed the article. It's still up there. You can go read it if you like. Yeah. How are we doing? I talk way too fast, and so I'm trying to stretch these slides out. Stacy's going to get mad at me. Next example. Al-Qaeda uses steganography. This, I don't know what to say about this story. basically, it somehow steganography is an old technology. It goes back to ancient Greece. It's basically the art of hiding messages inside pictures or other media. So the theory was that Al-Qaeda was using the internet, and Usenet specifically, to put secret terrorist messages into pictures and then using the internet to transmit those pictures. Wired called Bin Laden a steganography master. Cryptogram picked it up, terrorists and steganography. And again, you've got to look at the dates here, right? USA Today's in 2001, Wired's in 2001, Cryptogram picked it up in September of 2001. All right. The reality is that in August of 2001, there was actually a report, and I want to say these guys' names, Niels Provost and Peter Honeyman, detecting stenographic content on the internet. They downloaded 2 million images and scanned them all for steganography, found absolutely nothing. The reality was only published in one spot that I could find, other than the actual paper. The New Scientist picked this up, and massive search reveals no secret codes of images. So, but if you go back to the hype, right, Cryptogram is publishing this September 30th. This paper comes out in August. Now, I don't want to dig on Bruce or anything, because the guy's a hell of a lot smarter than I am. But it shows that even though the hype has been disproved, it doesn't get as wide a press coverage as the reality. And so Bruce probably never even saw this article. Yeah, again. Hype continues to live, right? The hype lives on. This particular article, if I remember correctly, USA Today quoted, mysterious government sources in the intelligence community, and we'll see that again later. But like I said, it continues to live on. If you don't know I can't pronounce his stupid name, Fadia. He's an InfoSec guy from India, and he has a multiple pages. Nutrition.org is a charlatan. So. Any other questions on steganography? Somebody else had a hand up. No? Okay. Next example, one of my favorites also, Brazil blackout. Richard Clark, another smart guy who I don't like to dig on too much, but what can I say? We can look forward to the kinds of things happening here that happened to Brazil, where hackers successfully brought down the power. All right. This led into a story by 60 Minutes, which some of you may have seen, where they got a quote from President Obama, because he gave a speech about what was going on, about power blackouts, but Obama didn't actually mention which country this was. But 60 Minutes claims that they had a half a dozen sources in the military, intelligence, and private security industries that corroborated the story. Now, when I look at this, 60 Minutes says they have a half dozen sources, and then we have one source, Richard Clark, who is in the intelligence community, and probably talking to all his buddies, who's promoting this issue, this theory that the Brazil blackout was brought down by external hackers, right? The reality is that it wasn't hackers. The reality is that the Brazil power company in question isn't even connected to the internet, that the power regulatory agency in Brazil actually fined the power company, was it $3.27 million for failing to maintain their insulators, and that the blackout was actually caused by soot on the insulators. Now, this was the fine was levied against this company in January 2009. 60 Minutes went to air in November of 2009. 8 months later, I can't count, 10 months later. So 60 Minutes stuck by their story and claimed that, we have 6 intelligence sources, despite the fact that there was already an investigation in Brazil that found that it never happened 10 months ago. My theory is that these half dozen sources all came from one source, and his first name is Richard. obviously I can't prove that, but it makes perfect sense to me, right? If you've ever talked to Richard, he loves to talk about Cyber Pearl Harbor and doomsday scenarios. And so there was a blackout in Brazil. He assumed, it must have been hackers. Start spouting off, and he never got the reality himself, right? Right. Yeah, the fine was actually levied in Brazilian reals, of course. It wasn't US dollars, but anyway. There's a footnote to this story. About a month after this really went down, and this was a big story in Brazil, I've been told, is that the power company in question had their website defaced, which then everybody started suspecting, maybe they are connected to the internet, maybe they did get hacked, but it was just their website, which was hosted on a third-party provider, of course. But it didn't add anything to the reality of the story, unfortunately, and actually helped promote the original hype. All right. Next example. How are we doing? Oh, I'm burning through these slides quick. I like this story because I get to say Weiner a lot. A lot of you probably remember, this was fairly recent. Representative Weiner in New York. I can't even say it with a stage face now. He posted a couple of nude pictures of him showed up on his Twitter stream, and he basically blamed hackers. Oh, my account was hacked. I picked this particular version of this Twitter hacker story because it got a lot of press, but there's a lot of other examples of it, and I'll show those in a second. But he goes on to say, basically, as soon as his Twitter account was hacked, the first thing he does, he doesn't call the police, he doesn't call Twitter, no, he hires a lawyer. All right, it doesn't make any sense to me. So the story breaks on May 30th. Lewd photo sent over Representative Weiner's hacked Twitter account. By May 31st, it was Weiner hires lawyer after alleged Twitter hacking. And then by the 31st, so you can see the story change a little bit, right? On the first day, NBC says his account was hacked. By the second day, now the press has started getting it, and they don't believe him, and they're saying it's an alleged hack. But none of these reporters, none of these stories actually called Twitter. Nobody got a quote from Twitter saying, yes. Okay. But nobody said that. We tried to reach Twitter for a comment, and they declined to say anything. None of those articles mentioned that at all. At least none of the ones I read. Yeah. So the reality, of course, by June 6th, he comes out and says the picture was me and I sent it. I take full responsibility for my actions. The picture was of me and I sent it. Yeah. But I picked the Weiner story because it got a lot of press. There are a lot more examples that you don't really hear a lot about. Haley Williams. Jaber Gaffney one is fairly recent. That happened a couple days ago. The Jaber Gaffney one's pretty outrageous. He went on an entire weekend tear of tweeting like nasty things about his wife and his cousin. There's some, I don't know, incest going on there or something, I don't know. But then the last tweet he puts is this is the real Jabbar, my account was hacked, and that wasn't me saying all those, so disregard whatever you read. But if you look at all this, they're all posted from and they're all in the same broken English style that he uses. So it's either somebody went to a hell of a lot